Well, welcome. Good afternoon. We're so glad to have you join us today for our Zoom workshop on growing citrus in the home garden. And we also have a little bit of presentation on what to do in March in your garden. We're so glad you're with us today. And it's just going to be a fun afternoon on this beautiful sunshiny day here in Napa. Okay, let me see if I can't get myself to forward my slide. Uh-oh.
Try going down to the lower left and see if that helps.
Lower left. Uh-oh, it was working earlier. I apologize to everyone.
Try page down.
Page down.
No, okay, go to the lower left with your cursor and you should see a little forward backwards.
There it is. Aha, I'm with you. Okay, great. So I apologize. We are the Master Gardeners of Napa County, and we're volunteers. Our organization is a volunteer organization, and we've gone through about 60 to 80 hours of a course training with UC Extension. And our mission is to offer research-based information to the gardening public. So if you're joining us from Napa, you're gonna be hearing all about Napa things today. But if you happen to be joining us from outside of the area, we might have specific information to Napa. So if it doesn't apply to your county, you might want to look up with your local county Master Gardeners for information that's pertinent to you. And our statewide program also, we'll be doing a follow-up survey. We have a little follow-up one that comes about 6 weeks after the presentation today. And if you'd like to opt out of the survey, you can put a note in the chat box with your first and last name, and we will remove you from the follow-up survey. And if you have any questions as we go, certainly also you can type those into the chat box and we may answer them during the presentation or also at the end. So we'll see how that goes. To answer your questions as we go. So we've got quite a bit to cover today. We are so fortunate because California is in one of the prime regions perfect for growing citrus. So we just have good fortune on our behalf there. We're going to cover several different topics about how to grow citrus in your yard today. A few interesting facts, a little bit about tree sizes and graphs, how to grow them in your garden optimally, how to select some varieties that would be successful in our area, and then some planting specifics, and then fertilizing and irrigation, which is always good to know, and then a little bit about frost protection, which is really important for our climate because we get these cold frost little snaps in the winter, which can be very damaging to citrus trees. So we want to cover that briefly, and then pruning is easy. So we'll talk about that briefly and a little bit about pest and disease control. So that's kind of what we're going to cover in our short time. So lots to cover today, but we're really happy to grow citrus. And I have 5 citrus trees in my garden. So they're some of my favorite things to grow. And I tell you, it is truly a joy. So let's talk a little bit first about just some interesting things about citrus overall. They were native to China and actually were brought to California many, many years ago, back in 1769 with our father Junipero serra that we learned in California history at the San Diego Mission. And those plants were so successful in Southern California that over the following, years, they just kept spreading further northward and further northward into what now is known as Orange County, Orange County, because there were miles and miles of citrus groves. And of course, Riverside County as well. They just thrived in that Southern California climate. And then by about 100 years later, they would already had spread as far northward as Northern California and Oroville. And we had excellent success even in Northern California. So our climate is just perfect for growing citrus. And now California and Arizona are the top producers of all citrus in the United States. And California alone grows 80% of the US fresh citrus. Now, Florida and Texas grow some of the other varieties. Those are often used for juicing and commercial production. But for fresh eating fruit, like you see in the picture here, California is growing 80%. So it's a wonderful, wonderful crop for us here. The other good fortune we have is that UC Riverside is one of the premium research agencies really in the world about growing citrus. So we have been fortunate to have the information at hand, and they have been for years studying cloning and varietals and rootstock and disease and pest resistance and frost tolerance and everything else. So we've just had right at our fingertips here in California lots of good information. And overall, for your home garden, there's now over 1,000 varieties of cultivars that you can grow. And that's quite an amazing thing when you really think about it, that you have that many choices for your home garden. So let's start a little bit with about what sizes the trees come in. There's 3 main sizes for any kind of trees. We have the standard trees. These that you see in the picture on the left are gorgeous, absolutely beautiful. But you can see the size of the doorway here in relation to the size of the tree. These are enormous. They grow 20 to 30 feet high, and you can see where the fruit is. It's way, way high off the ground. So for the home gardener, having a standard citrus tree, while beautiful, would be also very challenging to harvest because you'd need a ladder, and trying to prune a standard tree to make it stay short just grows against its natural way. It wants to be 20 to 30 feet high. So for the typical gardener, home gardener, probably the standard tree is going to be a little challenging. The most common ones for the home gardener would be a semi-dwarf tree. And the semi-dwarf runs, about 15, 20 feet max, but 15 feet is more common, and you can try to keep them a little bit shorter than that. They are easier to harvest, and you can keep them shorter, and they're definitely easier to handle in the home garden. And then here on the right-hand picture, you can see these little mandarins. There also are dwarf varieties, and they only go up to 10 feet tall. They're wonderful for a pot. And so you can choose a small variety. So as far as size goes, you can get almost any cultivar you would like on the differing rootstocks, because the rootstocks are cultivated for the tree size as well. So you can get the size that you need for your own garden. But another thing to think about with choosing the tree for your yard is that citrus trees have relatively shallow roots, really only 2 to 4 feet deep, which for a tree this big is relatively shallow. But with citrus trees, the diameter of the root zone. Okay, are we there? Now we're back.
We're
All
back.
right, so again, where we were talking about the diameter of the root zone. So again, really wide root zone. Now let's talk about how citrus grows. And in your garden, you're going to want to plan for these particular plants and what they like to be healthy and happy. These are perennial trees, so different than growing a lot of your regular deciduous trees where your fruit trees drop leaves in the winter and you have to have heavy pruning and so forth. Citrus trees are perennial. They're going to be green all year. They will drop some leathery leaves throughout the year at all different times. Mostly the most leaf drop is in the spring as we're coming out of the frost time. So right now you might see some extra leaves on the ground. That's normal. The first few years, years 1 to 4, they're mainly going to be developing roots. You're going to find you've planted your tree and it just kind of sits there, maybe 3 or 4 feet high, and it doesn't do much. It's because they have young roots and they're developing roots and spending time developing those the first few years, and then they will take off for you. Now, many of the varieties that are grown are self-pollinating. You'll want to check your labels at the nursery when you buy your plants to determine if they are self-pollinating. There are a few that are not, where they need to have more than one tree. Most often it might be a mandarin or a grapefruit where you have to buy a second tree to pollinate the plant. But for the most part, citrus are self-pollinating. They don't need additional trees. And what makes them really, really happy, which is why they grow so well in Napa, is they love hot weather. 70 to 90 degrees is where they just thrive. They are in our summers where we have these nice hot 85-degree days. They are just delightfully happy. And for citrus fruit, heat equals sweet. If you kind of put that into your mind, the more hours of hot weather they get, the sweeter the fruit is going to be. And citrus fruits do not ripen off the tree. So they can stay on the tree and continue to hang there, staying ripe and sweet, and they just continue to get sweeter over time. Now, interestingly enough, these trees, because they will flower both in spring, well, in spring, summer, and fall, most of the trees will have more than one flowering time. Because of that, you're going to see fruit developing throughout the season as well. So it's not unusual to see a tree with blossoms, small little fruits, maybe an inch in diameter, all the way up to some ripening ones that are ready to harvest. And they can hang on the tree and mature over an 8 to 16 month period, depending on the cultivar. So you might have trees that have lots of fruit on them almost all the time that you can go pick some fruit that's ready to go. The harvest season for a particular fruit time might be from 2 to 6 months, but again, they're going to be maturing over time. And again, the fruit stores beautifully on the tree, so they can just stay there. The other thing is because of these little blossoms that you see in the right-hand side of your screen, they have lots and lots of flowers, and it's natural for citrus trees to drop some of those blossoms and naturally thin themselves. That's very normal. It doesn't mean your tree's sick. And they'll have different amounts of little baby fruits also that will fall that are more than what the tree can handle. You can also thin your fruits as you go to get larger fruits. And also with citrus, there are some varieties that have alternate bearing habits where, for example, the Valencia orange, you might have a heavy crop one year and the following year you'll have a lighter crop. And that's customary for that particular variety. Now, what the other thing you'll see is while citrus trees can be grown from cuttings, most often you will see citrus trees grafted. And this picture on the left you'll see is showing a mature tree that has the grafted rootstock below, the scion that was put on here, and here is your graft union where the two connected. And they are grafted because over time they have found that certain rootstocks were more disease resistant, more cold hardy, would have higher productivity, or for certain qualities in the fruits. So over time, most of the trees will be grafted. So these are the things that you'll find about how they grow in your garden. And the other thing you need to think about is that they want full sun. They want a hot spot in your garden, preferably a west or south facing exposure where they can really get lots of heat. So then now you know how they grow and what they need in the garden. You're thinking, what do I want to grow? How do I decide? And you know what you'd like to eat, but there's a lot of varieties that are not available in the stores. And so you have to figure out what are some things, what are the traits that I like in the citrus fruits? So here's a wonderful resource. I put it here at the top of this slide for you, but it's also in the back page of the resources section. And this is from UC Riverside, of course, and they have online a wonderful resource with hundreds of cultivars and almost a full page on each variety. So if you really think, well, I want to grow some kind of grapefruit, for example, read about their different cultivars of grapefruit. You can find out what attributes they have that you might or might not like, or what might be suitable for your climate. But in general, I put these together. There are three kind of families of citrus. We have some that are very tender to frost, and they can't handle 30-degree weather. Even 32-degree weather is not going to work well. These trees will die. And the family here that are most tender would be your citron group. The Buddha's hand is that yellow one that kind of looks like fingers going down. Some of the varieties of lemons, and of course, probably the most tender is this Mexican lime. That's the one that's very popular growing in Florida, but it's just too cold here for that Mexican lime to grow without a whole lot of protection. So those varieties are the most challenging as far as frost hardiness. Then most frost tolerant are this other column on the right, which are more of our sour ones. Sour oranges, calamondine, satsuma mandarins can even handle 15 degrees, which is amazing, really. Kumquats and Meyer lemons can handle mid-20s. So these are the ones that are pretty cold hardy without a lot of extra work. And then the intermediate category would be, you know, our sweet oranges, our navels, our Valencias, blood orange, pomelo, and some grapefruits. They can all handle kind of mid-20s. Now, when you see on the label at the nursery, The hardiness for the temperature usually will tell you a certain degrees, like 26 degrees for 3 hours. That's telling you what the tolerance is for the tree, not for the fruit. The fruit may be even more vulnerable to frost. So this is the damage to the tree that you're considering. So protecting your trees from frost is going to be important. So as you're selecting, think about, what do I have in my garden and how can I protect my trees? Do I have amounts of sun that are needed to make them be successful? Now, here's a few general tips for success. I kind of put them all on one slide just so they're together. They're kind of sprinkled throughout the presentation. But because there's over 1,000 varieties, you've got early, middle, and late season harvest. So you can actually have citrus year round if you have multiple spaces for trees to harvest throughout the year. Consider your rootstock and cold tolerance depending on your microclimate in your yard. Another real important piece, especially for disease, is to purchase inspected plants from a reputable nursery. It's really hard to know you're getting a healthy plant if you're taking them from cuttings elsewhere. Consider the heat requirements for flavor. And what I mean by that is, for example, again, back to grapefruit. If you want a sweet grapefruit, it's going to need many days of heat. So you want a later maturing grapefruit to take advantage of those summer months that we have 80 to 90-degree weather. Heat equals sweet. And then again, your protected location, south or west facing, protect from wind. Not in a low spot also in the garden, because the cold weather in the winter will land there. And also citrus trees do not want to have wet feet. They want to have a good drainage. So you don't want them in a low spot where water will pool. And then you water deeply prior to pending frost. If there's one coming up in a few days, watering your soil below will also allow the soil to emit some heat up into the roots and the trunk of the plant. So that will help in a frost area. And then you can, of course, cover trees with frost cloth or wrap the trunk and so forth. We'll talk a little bit more about frost in just a moment. So here's some things about planting specifics. When do I plant them? Well, anytime will work, actually. They don't have to be dormant because they don't go dormant. So you can plant them primarily in spring is optimal, because right now, if you plant in the spring, we're not entering our hot weather. It allows them to get established before we get that extensive heat during the summer. So spring is ideal, but they can be planted throughout the year. Another one is, of course, you can plant them into a container or in the ground. Some of the small varieties of the little mandarins are wonderful in pots. They like a normal pH, 6 to 7.5, sandy to clay soil, wind-free spot, full sun. Avoid prior soil fungus. If you have a place where you know you've had some diseased plants, not a good place to put a citrus, because even though those rootstocks may have been developed to be resistant to fungi, there may still be residual things in your soil that could be damaging to the tree. And again, plan for that big, wide root space, double the drip line. And then here you see our little guy here on the right. He's got his big, wide hole. The soil depth is only going to be shallow, the depth of the root ball, but then twice the diameter. And the roots are very fragile with young trees. You want to keep the roots intact, grasp the tree below the graft union so that you don't compromise any of that where the graft union is. Put the pot in the hole and then cut your pot off and remove it very gently, and then pack your soil very gently around there to tuck it in. Now you want to leave that surface of the soil line where it was in the pot, leave that exposed. Don't cover that up with a bunch of mulch because you want the watering that you're going to do right after you plant it to go right into that root ball itself, and water it immediately to keep it nice and moist. So those are just the kind of techniques on the planting of it itself. And then, of course, you don't put fertilizer right then. And you're saying, so when do I put fertilizer? You don't fertilize when you're planting. Even though you'd think it would be, it's spring, I should fertilize, but not right at the beginning. The good thing about citrus is they are very easy to grow and they don't need a whole lot of extra fertilizer. The main thing citrus will need will be nitrogen. And you'll see that the leaves might show some discoloration. And so that lets you know to do a little diagnostic work on what my tree might need. In young trees, the first few years, you might just need a tablespoon per month of some nitrogen fertilizer sprinkled around the soil surface. And mature trees, 15 feet, you'll want to put perhaps a pound a year, but divided in three fertilizings, one in the spring, one in the summer, and one in the fall. So a third of a pound at each one of those of your nitrogen fertilizer. With small or dwarf trees, again, you follow the manufacturer's instruction on the fertilizer because it generally goes by the diameter of the trunk. And if it's a small tree, it needs much less fertilizer. And container grown trees need a balanced fertilizer, not just nitrogen, because they're just not getting enough nutrients from the surrounding soil because they're all in a pot. So nitrogen is the main thing. Occasionally, citrus might need phosphorus or potassium every couple years. But again, you can use your leaves as a diagnostic tool. So the main thing to look at right here, and I showed pictures on my screen, you'll see on this tree on the right, there's a lot of nice green, healthy leaves that are looking just fine. And then you see these yellowing ones in among there, and there's a close-up on the left. And you think, oh, it definitely needs something, but it's also got the green stuff going on. This is also something that happens commonly in the wintertime, because when the weather gets below 50 or above 100, citrus trees tend to kind of slow down in their growth cycle. So seeing yellowing right now at this time of the year may not mean that it needs nitrogen. It may just mean that in the cold weather, it's not drawing up the nitrogen that's already there in the soil. And as the weather warms, it may just start drawing it up, and those leaves may turn right back to green, which is typically what happens in my garden. But if they continue to stay discolored, a good thing to use them for is a diagnostic tool, because there's other, nutrient shortages that can happen depending on your soil in your particular area. So you can certainly bring a leaf sample to the master gardeners, and we can help you with diagnosing what nutrient deficiency might be happening in your given tree. But generally speaking, the commercial citrus fertilizers are heavy on the nitrogen end and have a little bit of other nutrients in them. And they're just wonderful. I mean, it's just a regular commercial citrus fertilizer 3 times a year will probably do really well. And again, you don't want to fertilize in the late fall. Fall is fine, but don't get too close into our frost season, because after you fertilize, there will be a new spurt of growth. And if you fertilize too close to the frost starting in possibly even as early as December sometimes, that new growth will be very fragile and very likely to be damaged by the frost by that hitting the tree. So spring, summer, fall is optimal, but not when it's first a new transplant. Wait a little while for new transplants. So then the other thing, what do they need? They need good irrigation. If you want nice juicy fruits like this lemon over here or this tangerine, you want to have good irrigation, and they are going to require water. But the good thing is, again, they have shallow roots. You can water deeply, but you don't have to water real deep because it's only down 2 to 4 feet. With young trees, basin flooding that's the one where you do the little circle around the tree with kind of a little trough. First year, that's optimal because the roots are right there and they can get all the water right close by. Drip emitters also are excellent, but make sure they're not right next to the trunk. Put them out to 8 inches on either side. The good thing with the emitter is you can control and measure water, checking a few inches down to make sure it's still remaining moist. But with a drip emitter, you can just add additional rings around the outside as the tree gets larger. So you're just going back out to that wider root zone that's so common with citrus trees. So monitor the moisture. Definitely in our hottest weather, July, August, September, you're going to need additional water deeply, and if it's hot or windy. So that's when you're going to have to focus on your watering, mostly is in that summer weather. Now we're back to frost. This is some of the key elements I think that are so important with protecting our citrus trees so they don't die. First, of course, choose the appropriate variety for our climate. Something that will grow here that does have some frost tolerance is great. A thermal wrap on the trunk. They sell like little thermal things. You can just wrap the trunk with that for the winter, especially with young trees. They need that thermal wrap. Another way for a young tree to protect it is to make a collar and stuff the inside of the collar with sawdust. And that will give some warmth, especially around that graft union, which is really the most vulnerable part. The other thing you can do is put a canopy over the top of the tree, the foliage. Even some of our summer umbrellas that we use in the summer, you can use the same umbrella to protect over your top of your tree during the winter time to protect some of that top foliage. And the C9 electric bulbs, those are the old-fashioned Christmas lights that are kind of like a little almond shape. And they produce just a little bit of extra heat. And you can string those into your trees during the winter time and plug those in overnight when we're going to have a cold, cold night, and they will emit a little extra heat as well. And I had said earlier also to water prior to a predicted frost so that the soil can emit some heat up to the root and the trunk of the tree. Don't prune in fall or winter, and then choose a sunny place again, west or south facing. And then if you happen to have a citrus tree that's in a pot, you're certainly able to bring that under a shelter, under the eaves of your house, bring it onto your porch so that they're a little bit protected from frost as well. And then the best thing about citrus, well, they don't need a lot of pruning. That's another really easy one because most of our deciduous fruit trees really, really require a pruning plan, month by month throughout the year or by quarterly at least. With citrus trees, very, very little pruning is necessary. The first year and second year, you're going to choose your main scaffold branches to get a nice firm form for the tree, and then watch for suckers below the graft. Cut any that come up from the ground because those are just going to suck energy out of the tree development, and kind of ignore the rest. They're going to form their own little nice dome-shaped tree mostly on their own. Then once they've kind of got a good scaffold, years 3 to 6, you're going to remove occasional branches if they're crisscrossing, rubbing each other, or going in the wrong direction and looking lopsided. You can form a nice sturdy framework when the tree is young. But with the mature tree, not much to do for pruning, which is great. Just kind of keep the height contained for ease of harvest. You might need to do some light thinning if they get too dense because you want to get some sunlight into the fruit and to the leaves. There will be some little sticks and twigs that dry up on the inside. You can prune those out and kind of clean up the inside of the tree, but really not a lot of pruning is required, which is great. Best time to prune is right after our winter frosts in spring, because you'll have a little bit of frost damage possibly on the top of the tree. But you can prune right then. And then as needed throughout the year, here and there, twigs or so forth can be pruned off. Now, the only difference is lemons. Lemons tend to have these little, kind of scrawny, long branches that kind of stick up, and they can get real twiggy and weak. And so if you have a lemon tree and you want to be pruning it, try to look for some nice sturdy scaffold branches and prune off some of the straggly stuff that's just getting out of hand because it won't support the fruit very well. Now, the next thing is to think about pests and diseases. And these, I have to tell you, these photographs are right now from my garden. I basically got them all except for the gopher. There's our little gopher on the left, and he's eating a carrot. Well, they love the roots of the citrus, young citrus trees. So if you have gophers in your yard, you want to put some caging around the roots as you're planting, and also around that trunk, because those little guys will munch on that and they will just eat those roots right up, and your citrus tree will not thrive. But these other ones are the common culprits. On the top right there, you see some scale. Then we've also got some mealybugs. We've got some leaf miners. We've got some snails that chewed the corners. It's the typical stuff we see throughout our gardens. And you can look up on UCIPM on how to control these. They're fairly easy to control. Some of them can just be washed off with the hose. Other times, as you're doing your little gentle pruning, you might prune off a leaf or two, like that scale one I have there in the middle of the screen. I'm just going to cut the tip of that branch off and prune it right off of there and be done with it. So the pests and diseases are not too difficult with citruses. There's nothing really, really awful except for one thing, which is the Asian citrus psyllid. It's the one that's a little more challenging and is a serious disease now for our area. This little insect you see on the lower right, he looks like a little brown. It's about the size of an aphid. He looks like a little moth. And they tend to suck the leaves just like this in this 45-degree angle. So that's distinct from most other insects you'll find on a citrus tree. We haven't found them in our area in Napa just yet. They're approaching, they've been in, I think, south of San Francisco, and they have been found in Southern California and also in Texas. And they have been, unfortunately, really decimating some of the crops, because this insect is a vector for this Huanglong being bacteria, and it can take it as it sucks, it's taking the sap from one and it's moving its mouth parts to and from an infected tree to an uninfected tree and spreading this disease. So unfortunately, the disease doesn't have a cure just yet, but it can kill a tree in 3 to 5 years. So we really want to be diligent as home gardeners to watch that it doesn't come into our area. And if it does, there's a website here you can contact, or our county office as well, to inform them, because what they will do is quarantine the trees. And we don't want to take cuttings or fruit from diseased trees and move them around to other parts of the state or share them, because that disease could be spread elsewhere to other people. So that's the one that's kind of a challenging pest, but there is some good news on that, is that one of the researchers at UC Riverside does have a promising finding. They have a field trial for a particular antibiotic peptide that they have located that they believe is showing promise to kind of help with this disease. So hopefully they'll find out more information as that proceeds. So on that note, that's really kind of how to grow citrus. There's me in the middle with my big one. I just love that navel orange. That's my favorite tree. But hopefully we've given you some insights on how to grow and how easy they are to grow in our area. It's really not difficult. So hopefully you'll choose one that's a beautiful tree. They're wonderful pollinators and delicious fruit. So hopefully you'll have something that you would like to grow for your garden, and want to know if you have any questions right now, or if we want to wait till the end.
Well, I think there are a couple of questions that you might want to talk about before we go to the what to do.
Okay.
Dan says, is it okay to prune if there's still fruit on the tree?
Yes. Yes. Actually, it's perfectly fine. And actually, if you have fruit that's ripe, that may be a branch you want to remove. It's kind of scrawny, it's sticking out there, and the fruit's dangling down and pulling the branch down. That may be a branch you want to cut off right there and try to contain the tree a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, maybe if the fruit's not ripe, you're going to want to use it for something else.
Well, I have to say, for lemons, it's almost impossible to ever prune when there's not fruit, because it
Yes.
pretty much has fruit year round.
That's very true. Mine definitely do.
And then another pruning question. So to top the tree for ease of harvest, you just cut the leading branch?
It's not wise. You don't want to cut the one main one if there's a one main one. My tree doesn't generally grow. My trees don't grow with one main one. I usually have several different scaffolding branches. So you don't want to totally cut it down, but I would cut off the side ones and keep it shorter overall. Vaughn, do you have anything you'd add on that one?
You know, for the
top it off at the top.
Yeah, for the commercial trees, they actually almost hedge them. So you can trim them like a hedge if you wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
You will stimulate a lot of young new growth. So you want to be careful with that. And especially for some of the things like lemons, if you do a lot of pruning, you encourage it to produce thorns. So just keep that in mind. If you're constantly pruning a tree, you're going to get more thorns.
Mm-hmm. By the way,
yeah,
on the pruning end, these citrus trees make a beautiful espalier against a fence. You can actually, as Yvonne's talking about, making it like a hedge, shortening it and making it wider. They're lovely that way. They will widen for you, and because again, the roots go out that way. So, yeah, you could make them almost any shape you would like.
There are a couple of questions about fertilizer. Mm-hmm. One person says, is it okay if I just use worm castings? This person must be avoiding other kinds of fertilizers. Do you have any opinion about that?
I don't know why worm castings would be bad. I think they would be fine, and then see what happens with your leaves. I would use your leaves as a diagnostic tool to see if it's getting what it needs.
Right. And another person says, my lime tree had all the leaves yellow and fall off in the winter. New growth and flowers do come back now. And would you suspect that it was reacting to the cold?
Most likely. Yeah, because those lime trees are so fragile to the temperature. They're just, I mean, even 32 degrees is really hard for certain varieties of limes. So I would not be surprised a bit if that happened. Now it could, if the tree's relatively mature, it could survive and come back, which is great. For the young trees, it would be pretty hard. but limes are tough because they're tough to grow in our climate because they don't like that cold weather.
Okay, and I have another question for you. But I don't want you, and then we'll go to the what to do time, but can you speak a little bit about growing them in pots and whether you repot them?
Now I I have grown them in pots. They tend to get root bound, of course, because they want to be wide. So what I would do with the ones in pots is I would remove it every now and again when it's starting to get larger, and I would probably trim the roots around the edge of the pot to give it some fresh root growth again, and put it into a slightly larger pot if you can. I mean, and if you think about, if any of you have been to Seville, Spain, they grow beautiful big trees in very large pots, but they're in a pot their whole lifetime in some people's patios and whatnot. So they can be contained to a pot, but I think they need a little extra care.
Okay. And another person says, what to do when the barrel pots disintegrate? Well, obviously, I think you just need to find another pot to put them in.
Yeah.
Put them in the ground.
Yeah.
That's going to happen. We want to go to the what to do. We'll have a little more time for questions shortly. So I will share that, and we'll turn this over to let me get there. Sorry. Okay, from the beginning. I'm supposed to be in the slideshow, and why isn't? Oh, here we go. So Sharon Lambton is going to talk about what to do in the food garden aside from citrus at this point.
And I am here. So the March is a very interesting month, as you can already tell. We've had an extreme variety of heat this month. We've had some very warm days, and we've had some very cold nights. And we're probably going to continue to do that for at least another month, I would think. At least it's not abnormal to do that. So I would just monitor those things. If you do want to cover newly planted citrus or some of your other things, just make sure, see what the temperature is going to be. And also, unfortunately, this year, we're having to monitor water as well. I know I usually don't turn my irrigation back on until usually April, but this year I turned it on in the middle of February because we just had so little rain. And we still need to get water to those plants that are out there, so particularly fruit trees. So just watch what you're doing. And of course, we don't need the amount of water that we need in the middle of summer. So we can certainly use less than we would in the hotter weather, but we do need to get some water into the soil because it's not getting any rain this year, which is so unfortunate. So as to irrigation, when you turn your system on, make sure you check everything. And probably a good idea to do that 2 or 3 times during the length of time that you have it on, but certainly when you first turn it on. Make sure all the emitters are working and the water is going to the right places. I know that we have furry animals, that some of them are our pets and some of them are, squirrels, and they move things around. So we just want to make sure when we first turn it on that the emitters are getting to where we want them to be. And so the best thing is to check the entire system when you turn it on. Okay, so this time of year, we can plant quite a few seeds directly into the soil. And here are some examples of ones that can be planted. I know in my garden right now, I have carrots and chard and lettuce and beets all planted. And certainly any of these others could be as well. And again, you need to make sure that they get water because seedlings in particular need quite a bit of water. They don't need deep water, but they do need some water in order to sprout. And then if you were smart enough, 6 or 8 weeks ago, you planted some seeds inside, and those are now ready to go into the ground. So these are the things that you can plant out at this time of year. So certainly broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts will all do well as your onions and leeks and garlics. Those are the kinds of things you can put in now. You'll start getting a harvest in about probably by the end of April, you'll be harvesting. Okay, and now you can start your seeds indoors or in a cold frame. And the things you're going to be wanting to put out in your summer garden or your warm season vegetables are here. The tomatoes and eggplants will take about 6 weeks to get to the size that you want them to be before you can set them out. Peppers will take 8 to 10 weeks. They're a little bit slower. And make sure that you don't plant your warm season vegetables until your soil temperature is at least 65 degrees. If you plant them before that, the plant will just sit there and look at you and go, why? Why did you do this? And it's some people try to fool it by putting plastic on the ground and heating the ground that way. And you can definitely do that, but it's a lot of work. And for the most part, seedlings that are set out at the right time will definitely catch up. And you can also start harvesting now the things that you planted a couple of months ago. Here's some examples. I know I've already harvested my cauliflower and most of my broccoli. The fava beans are still growing. And as I said, I have carrots, beets, and lettuce that I just put in. So I just thought this was a gorgeous picture. And I have grown that variety of cauliflower, and it's quite nice. And then we want to continue to practice good maintenance. So we definitely want to weed, because weeds are always out there. I have a lovely supply right now. I was picking asparagus yesterday and couldn't believe the number of weeds that were out there competing. And also eliminate pests. So slugs and snails are the best to hand pick. And then earwigs, the rolled up newspaper trick works very well for them. So you just take a newspaper, if you want to get it just a little bit damp, you can, and roll it up and leave it where you've seen signs of earwigs, and they will just crawl in there as happy as can be, and you can pick it up the next day and throw it in the trash. And definitely row cover can be used to protect your young crops. So those seedlings that you just sent out or the seeds that you just put in, the squirrels and birds are going to be very, very happy to see those. And if you want to make sure that you get more than the squirrels and the birds, you need to use some row cover. So here's an example of row cover. It doesn't have to be, a thing of beauty, but it works. And then when you prepare your beds, the latest research recommends cutting the plants off at the soil line, leaving the roots undisturbed. So for example, I harvested my cauliflower a while ago. I just literally cut them off at the root line and left the roots in there. And actually I've replanted that bed with some other things, but you can still see the leftover stalks from the cauliflower. And I've been doing this for the past 3 or 4 years, and I have not had any problem with replanting. The things that you're taking out generally have been planted some distance apart. And then if you start putting in your new plants, just make sure you don't plant them in exactly the same spot as the old ones. The idea here is to keep that underground community the same. So you don't want to be disturbing it. You want to add compost to your beds to get ready to plant, but you don't have to work it in. You can just put it on the top. And as you dig your new plant in, some of it will go down into the hole, but for the most part, it'll be on the top and it'll be just fine. And the other thing that you want to do, again, in order to keep that underground community thriving, is to replant as soon as you can. So maybe instead of taking those broccoli plants out that have now gone to seed and stopped producing, maybe you want to leave them in. And then when you're ready to put a warm season crop into that bed, you can cut them down. And as of now, my broccoli is beautiful. It's actually quite nice with little yellow flowers, and the birds and bees are absolutely loving it. So, and that's all we have for what to do today. Do you have any questions?
Let's look at the chat really quick. I don't see specific questions about the vegetable stuff.
Okay.
I did ask a question. It's on the chat, but I can ask it If
Okay, what is it?
but I was wondering if Sharon can tell me the formula she uses for her seeds for the soil when she wants to sow the seeds indoor.
Oh, I just use a potting mix. I use any organic potting mix that's out there. I don't actually mix my own. Pat, you have more experience with this than I do. Do you have a formula?
I wouldn't call it exactly a formula, but our handbook, the Master Gardener Handbook says for seeds, you should actually use a seedling mix rather than a potting mix. Some seeds are going to be very susceptible to damping off. And so if you've had damping off when you're start seeds, make sure you use a formula for seedling mix. And
Pat,
the mix
I misspoke. I meant to say a seed starting mix and I said the wrong thing. So sorry.
Oh, great. And then I do make a homemade seed starting mix. I use coir, which is ground up coconut hulls rather than peat, because there are concerns about the sustainability of using peat, and coir is a byproduct of the coconut industry. And that's the main thing that's in my seedling mix, but I also add to it a little bit of sand and a little bit of either vermiculite or perlite. And that works well. When you're starting seeds in a seedling mix, however, once they sprout and start developing leaves, they need to be moved, they need to be up potted into a potting mix, or they need to have weak liquid fertilizer about once a week until you put them in the ground. Did that answer your question, Elahe?
It did, Pat, and I recognized your name and voice from the last workshop I took from you. And I just wanted to let you know that I did follow your recipe for giving half a strain fish fertilizer, and these guys got greener, they perked up, they felt like sturdier. And it's amazing how much that little bit of information helped all the seedlings. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. It's always nice when the advice we give actually works. I'm going to stop sharing because I can't figure out how to bring I was going to bring my video on so you can see my face. We didn't mention at the beginning of this, but we did record this. We do record this program, and it will be posted to our website in the events section of the website. We also, Kathleen, did you show your reference page? I thought it was in your slideshow, but I don't remember seeing it.
I think I stopped the slideshow. It's at the end, and there's a list of references there, both resource books. There's a Sunset Guide, there's the Master Gardener Handbook, and then there's the website also for UC Riverside, which is a great one.
Well, and in case since you've sat through this talk with us and you don't want to wade through a recording, I have taken that resource page that Kathleen prepared and made it into a document, and that will be posted separately with the recording. And that usually takes our webmaster a few days, but sometime later this week, all of that will be posted and you can find it at our Napa County Master Gardener website. And are there more questions anyone have?
I just wanted to add a couple of comments about frost protection. Kathleen talked about a lot of different ways to protect the trunks of the trees, which we generally don't get cold enough that we have to worry about that. But one thing that's really important is when you do put a cover over the tree, you really don't want it to touch the leaves. So it's best if you can put a frame or like an umbrella or something like that, where it's not going to actually be on the plant, because that will transfer, that cold air will go right through whatever you put on there, especially plastic, and it will then still freeze the tissue. And the leaves will usually fall off if they're damaged, so that will cause them to fall off. But it'll protect the inner part of the tree, which is what's going to keep it alive if that trunk stays alive. So
I just want to give a comment that not only my PG&E bill was higher, that let me know we definitely had very freezing winter but all my citrus let me know, which is just cute for them to talk to me like this. I just wish that I had prevented a lot of them from getting so freezing and lose their leaves and fruit, but I guess lesson to be learned. You know, when it's cold out there, I'm not going out there. I don't, it is.
We have our Christmas lights. I string them up in the tree, and then I have them on a timer, so I don't have to go out there in the middle of the night and turn them on. So we have a timer that's just a, you know, plug-in timer that the lights go into, and then, you know, we set it to come on at a certain time, especially if we know it's going to be late, dark, you know, because it doesn't get really, really cold usually until 2 or 3 in the morning or 5 in the morning. So, you know, you don't have to turn the lights on the whole time. So that might
I
be
just
one way.
want to say, if we had more rain, it would not have gotten so freezing cold to damage all these trees. We just didn't have any rain, so.
Right.
Yeah.
And I want to put in a pitch that didn't Kathleen say there were something like 1,000 varieties of citrus?
Yeah.
So when, you know, I live on the valley floor of Napa, and I do record temperatures into the high 20s every once in a while, not very often and not a lot during the winter. So when I have added citrus to my landscape, I have looked at the ones that are pretty tolerant. And I really wanted an orange tree, and I think the orange trees tend to be in the middle ground for frost tolerance. So that tree got planted on the southeast facing side of a garage, so that it would get, even as an unheated garage, it still protects it quite a bit from frost. And
the other thing I put in the chat is, you're right, there's a lot of varieties, and they're doing a lot of crosses now. So you can get, you know, if they just really want a lime, you can get a lime kumquat or a lime mandarin cross, and that gives it a little bit more tolerance. So you can get some of those that still gives you the flavor, but you get a little bit of more tolerance.
Yeah, one of the reasons Meyer lemons are so prolific and grow so well in our climate is that they believe there's some sort of cross with the sour mandarins, and they're just more tolerant of cold than our traditional Eureka or Lisbon lemons. I've killed both a Lisbon and a Eureka lemon in the far distant past, but my Meyer lemon that is about 25 years old actually survived a snow day that we had many years ago. Lost all the fruit that year, but the plant survived, and it continues to provide many, many lemons. Yeah. So I decided I would just love Meyer lemons.
That was the other thing. We did mention fruit. The fruit will freeze at a slightly higher temperature than the tree itself. And one of the tricks to that for some of the oranges and things is to try to get one that bears a little earlier. So that the fruit is ripe a little sooner. You can pick it, you know, if you know a frost date is coming, you can pick all the fruit, or even a few days after the frost, if you pick all the fruit and process it, because what will happen is the fruit will stay on the tree, but it will actually dehydrate on the tree. And so you'll get that, you know, when you cut them open, it's that really dry, kind of crumbly inside. So they're actually good for a few days after the frost, but once they start to dry out, then you'll need to pick them all and process them or juice them or something.
Yeah, and I see a question about, will the damaged citrus leaves grow back later? If they're damaged, frost damaged leaves, they won't, but that's a good time after, as we're coming into March, to prune off those ones at the top of the tree or at the side where they did get frost damage. That's the good ones to prune off and then get started with some new growth, because those frost damaged leaves will eventually just drop. But another tip I've found with harvesting damaged fruit that's from the frost is I try after a frost to go to the top of the tree where they're most likely to have gotten damage. And those are the ones I'm going to pick first, because I want to see if they're damaged or not. And then I leave the ones that were kind of inside the tree or protected by the higher branches. I'll harvest those way later in the season, because they'll hang there for months if they're not damaged. So I try to harvest from the top down very strategically for that reason, to use up those frost damaged fruits when I can.
Good point. And we generally recommend don't start pruning until you start to see new growth, because, you know, we can get a late frost. We've gotten frost as late as June. So be real careful. And I wouldn't get in there and do a lot of heavy pruning yet. It's too early to prune your citrus.
Yes.
Even though it looks horrible. I know it looks horrible and dead. You want to prune it out, but you got to wait a little bit more.
Someone asked if we recommend any specific nurseries, and we don't recommend specifically nurseries. What we tell people is go to a reputable nursery if you're buying a plant. You know, we all know where we live, what the reputable nurseries are. And if you're going to do mail order, you might just look for nurseries that specialize in citrus in California.
And that was
Kathleen?
when I did want to say something about budwood. You know, if you decide you do want to graft, like your tree got damaged and you can tell that it's growing back from rootstock and you want to graft it, please, please don't just take cuttings from your friend's house because you can spread diseases. So you need to buy certified budwood, as well as, you know, it's easy enough to go to a nursery and buy a new whole plant, but if you're trying to bud it yourself, you have to buy good certified budwood, and that is available. It's a little bit expensive, but you need to buy it from there's only one supplier in California that produces that, and it's clean, that doesn't have any viruses or diseases.
Well, and I wanted to reinforce what Kathleen was talking about, the one lung bean disease and the citrus psyllid. There are counties in California that are under quarantine where it is literally illegal to move any part of citrus from those counties because they already have the disease and they already have the insect. So really, if you have friends we're in Northern California, have friends in Santa Barbara who have a fabulous orange tree, do not take a budwood from Southern California, because we don't want this disease to spread any further.
Well, you saw 80% of the fruit comes from California, so we don't
Yeah.
want to destroy our citrus
No.
industry either.
Yeah, here's Dan Lopez, who's joining us from Orange County. He says they're under quarantine there. So they really know about this.
Yeah.
This disease has really decimated some of the industry in Florida, which is where it popped up first. We thank you all for joining us. This is the Napa County Master Gardeners Food Growing Forum, and we have a food topic each month. Plus, we hope that we're a resource if you have questions in general every month about food growing. And next month, we're going to be talking about a salad garden. So leafy greens mainly. So we hope you will want to join us then. You need those leafy greens for your citrus salads, you know?
There you go. Perfect.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.